Good afternoon and welcome to November's edition of Talking Tech, Client Server's webinar live stream. I am Michael Oliver. I am the head of marketing here at Client Server, and to my right is Adam Jukes, who's the senior account manager and the team lead for the Java and DevOps teams. Hello, Adam.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well.
Good.
Well. We are broadcasting live across LinkedIn. It's the first time that we have done this. So if you have any questions or any thoughts, there's a chat box literally on the right-hand side of the screen where you can submit questions or comments or anything of that nature. We'll be more than happy to answer it. And these are going to be a monthly fixture. So from next year onwards, there will be a Talking Tech webinar at the end of every month, and we will cover everything from candidate advice through to market trends and everything in between. So it's going to be a real sort of smorgasbord of what's happening in the tech world, particularly in the UK. But today we are very much focused on what is an insane jobs market. We have not seen anything quite like this. Like, I can tell you that on our website, where we have more than 600 live roles, we have had for the last 3 months, we have had unprecedented traffic. It is the busiest our website has ever been. And certainly there are companies who are keen to hire, who are keen to bounce back from lockdowns and from everything to do with the pandemic. And it has been one of the most rigorous markets we have seen. But we know that it's not just a case of, if you're a candidate jumping on board and just kind of getting a job. There are some things that people can do a little bit better, and there are some things even the most experienced techies are doing which they could do better. So we're going to explore everything about the job hunt, about the market, and what you can do to make the most out of what is happening in the world of tech. So one of the things that we have seen a lot of is that a lot of candidates, I feel like, if you get the sense, Adam, that a lot of candidates are thinking, not only is this a great job market, it's something which I can just turn up to, and I can get, I'll get that extra 30K, I'll get that extra promotion. It's basically there for me on a plate. That's not the case, is it?
No, it really isn't. And we, you do get it all the time. And I think it's a market where I think we as a business kind of come to the fore because of the relationships that we try and build with clients and with candidates. But I think that also it's something that we need to make sure that we're managing candidates through a process with. And I guess, look, when we're engaging with candidates for the first time, it's difficult for them to buy into us any more than they do with any others, because they just see this obscene amount of opportunity out there and think, well, I'm just going to spread myself thinly and hope that by giving myself as much opportunity as possible, it then sort of leads to the role. But in doing that, I think a lot of people overlook the specific preparation that is required. And I think because there are so many candidates out there, but there is so much opportunity, I think that even though from a client perspective, clients need to be willing to really, talk up their opportunities, perhaps more than they ever had to. Equally, candidates need to take it as seriously as ever, because if they don't, there are going to be people to step in. And yeah, look, I've never seen so many ridiculous job offers. I've never seen so many, counter offers from clients, but in the same way, people do still want to get value for money. And if somebody's not willing to do specific client preparation, learning about not only what they do, but what they're all about, what they're looking to do. And, we get candidates that will absolutely love something, but it's having the ability to convey that as well. So look, it's a really tough market, albeit it's a very good market, because I think that the more moving parts that you've got, the more people you've got in it, the more candidates you've got in it, and the more clients that you've got willing to spend serious money, it's as important as ever to actually get the search right.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things that candidates are asking for right now? Like, there's that sense that this is a market, but what are the kind of things that they're bringing to the fore?
Well, look, I think that people realise that they can be fairly selective with what they want, and I think that once we got to the point where, look, when we went into lockdown, obviously we all know what happened to the market then, and as we've come out of it, I think none of us quite knew how long this market was going to last, and it's still going strong, and there's certainly no signs of it slowing down. But I think that once people realized that they were going to start spending money again, candidates were able to really take control. I think people were less cautious of moving because they weren't so much thinking about, do I want to change? I'm secure at the moment. I've still got my job. Is it going to be a case of last in, first out if things go wrong? I think we now realize that it's been used by a lot of clients as an opportunity to perhaps, reevaluate what they need. And, I don't think that you can just be steady in a role without really adding and offering value. So I think that, good new candidates are almost revitalizing the market, which is great. But I think that, listening from a candidate's perspective to advice that we're trying to give, but also listening from our perspective to what candidates are really after, is kind of the big key, which is why I said, for us, it's an opportunity to really come to the fore, because we've never been the kind of company that have gone down the pure volume route, because that's never been where we've added the most value. It's those relationships. It's that the niche search is potentially thinking out the box sometimes. But it's something that we can really work with, because as long as somebody knows what they want, somebody knows what they're after, somebody knows aspirationally what it is that they're looking to achieve, not just now, but potentially, in the short, medium and long term, then we can almost strategize the best way for them to approach this market, because you can literally select. And you mentioned the amount of jobs that we've got previously, but I mean, 620 odd at the last count. Even with the two markets that I'm looking after, we're pushing 120 roles, which means that if you've got a good relationship with a candidate, you can genuinely give them a real choice, but a choice where I think there's this huge value now in having one point of contact. We've always done that with clients. The way that our model is set up is that we have account managers that are responsible for clients. Then the client only has one point of contact, and it makes the communication channels a lot more efficient. And I think even more so than ever now with candidates, when you've got the ability to be able to offer them enough to be able to take charge of the process on their behalf, that there's no vested interest, there's no conflict of interest. It means that you can genuinely, as long as there's that transparency, have genuine conversations to help them make genuinely the best choices. And that for us is obviously a great situation to be in, because, as I say, it's where I believe that we've always added most value.
Yeah. And even so, it seems to me that people are thinking much less about quick wins. I can bump up my salary by 10,000, 20,000 pounds. It is more of a career mindset, and that's certainly what we would be positioning it from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, there are a lot of things to think about when you look at a market like it is at the moment, because as much as I would love to think that this market's going to last forever, we all know that it's not. And if you get a 25, 30 grand pay rise now, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get that in the next move. And if you'd have said to me 10 years ago, what's the average tenure in a permanent role within the market you work, I'd have probably said 4 or 5 years. Whereas now we're talking about 18 months, 2 years tops, because of the way that the technology world is ever moving. And therefore, if you take a significant rise now, you could potentially be almost taking yourself out of a pay rise further down the line, because there is a cap. Their salaries aren't endless, and if you are somebody that is more sort of junior into your career, maybe you're in that sort of an 18 months to 5-6 year gap, it's really appealing to think that you can get an extra 10 or 15 grand. But the reality is also, there is nothing less motivating than not being rewarded for the work that you're doing. And therefore, if you're taking it all now, is there anything left? Is there anything more to be able to consider in 6 or 12 months when you've overachieved all your targets, but all of a sudden your boss is saying, well, actually, I'd love to give you a pay rise, but I gave you all when you joined.
Yeah.
So, that's the kind of thing that we can help people with and help them understand and manage expectations. And, I think that, again, as long as people are willing to listen, this market, yes, there are pay rises and they're happening left, right, and center, but that's not all that it's about. It is also about making sure that, we factor in all the things that are lacking in current positions. We factor in all the stuff, as I said before, that people want aspirationally, because now is the perfect time to be able to consider all those things and make a strategically good move for not just now, but for the career as an ongoing process.
Yeah. You deal with candidates every day.
Yeah.
You deal with them, you speak with them, there's probably nothing you haven't heard from a candidate. But there are some things, even the most experienced and perhaps even on paper, wizened kind of candidate will do that will drive you kind of crazy.
Yep.
What are some of the common easy mistakes people are making?
Basic things like just taking for granted the fact that the way that the market is means that if you know your stuff from a technical perspective, that's like a golden ticket to offer stage, and that's definitely not the case. It frustrates the hell out of me when we get feedback from clients and candidates haven't gone to the trouble of preparation, of doing their due diligence, of reading up on it. I know from my own hiring perspective, if I'm interviewing a candidate to come and join us and they know very little about who we are or what we do, you take that personally. Mm-hmm. And clients are the same. They want people that are genuinely bought into what they're doing, that want to be part of the journey. So I think the number one for me is definitely, you do all your tech preparation. And I'll come on to another point in a second about people taking that for granted as well. But if people don't research the companies, and yes, it's our job to be able to convey who the client are, what they want, what they're after, because that's something that we pride ourselves in understanding as part of the relationship that we have with those clients. But I also, you kind of want to give them enough to understand who the client is, but still leave enough for them to need to do themselves, because I think that gets even more buy-in from a candidate if they actually go ahead and do that. Because short of reading stuff like Glassdoor reviews, which frankly I'm not a massive fan on because they are so subjective. It's not just that. It's like reading, have they got a tech blog? Are they online? Have they got a presence with meetups? Do they do talks? Do they have like groups that they run? Find out what it's like culturally to be there as well, and put yourself in that position, because ultimately when you're dealing with software engineers, not only do they all have different skill sets, but they all have different personalities as well. And sometimes a client may sound brilliant, but be a million miles away from somewhere that's going to get the best out of them, just through the nature of who they are and how they're set up and the whole sort of company culture. And finding all that stuff out is imperative in making the right choice, particularly now that it's not the norm in 100% of cases to actually go and meet a client in person before you have to make a decision. If you're not going into the office and literally looking around and thinking, I can see myself working here. If somebody was to interview with us through this platform and see where we're sat now, it doesn't tell you about who we are, what we do, the way that we approach things, what our work-life culture is like, and everything else. So I think all of that background work is so important when it comes to preparing for interviews.
Has that been when you're telling a candidate about a particular role, and they're doing remote interviewing and in fact remote onboarding, and that sense of culture is almost absent, or at the very least has been changed to fit a more online presence? when a candidate wants to get a sense of what a place is about, and it's largely based online, what are some of the things that you make them think about?
Look, I think that people like to hire almost in their own mold.
Yeah.
So you can always read a lot into the type of organization that you're speaking to from judging the people that you're interviewing with. But there's obviously much more than that. I think that it's an important, from a candidate's perspective, the way that I would approach it is it's a great opportunity for you to have some questions in your back pocket, because coming off that final call that you may have, without having used that as an opportunity to, what's the working culture like? Say we do all end up coming back into the office at some point. What's it going to be like? What's the environment like? What do you like about working there? Flipping it round and getting that real feel. It's multi-beneficial, because it shows that you're interested, but equally it also gives you much more of an insight to what it's actually like. Move that interviewer away from the interviewer mold into potential colleague mold, and that will give you much more of an idea of what they're like to work for, to work with, and to be a colleague of.
That's the thing that so many companies or interviewers say, is that you can ask a candidate any number of questions, but you don't get any back. And it's just that little bit of an indication that they have not only done their due diligence, but they're interested enough to actually put you on the spot.
Absolutely.
And ask what you're all about.
Yeah, 100%. And whether it's interviewing in tech, or whether it's interviewing in any industry, I think that's one of the critical points from my perspective that I would use alongside a capability to actually make a final call. And in a market that is so driven by candidates, because there is so much opportunity, I think that the reality is, if you can stand yourself or set yourself slightly above the competition by building that rapport, by showing that interest, by asking those questions, you do take things to another level, and the relationship that you build with an interviewer then takes on a completely different view.
Yeah. One of the things that we often kind of find, particularly working in the sector we work in, is that we get people from all different kind of walks of life, all different personalities. You will find almost the quote unquote extroverted kind of star of the meetup, kind of like, I'm willing to prepare and show you my code kind of candidate. But not to play stereotypes, but there is a ring of truth to it. You often get the more sort of introverted, the more kind of like the ones who just want to tell you about the work that they're doing, but they have no interest in kind of projecting and putting themselves out there.
Yeah.
If you're a candidate who is thinking, my colleagues and friends, they're getting great jobs, but God, how do I make that next step? And I'm not quite as out there as they are. What's the best thing they can do with a recruiter to kind of help get over those hurdles?
Well, I think, look, I actually used to ask a direct question to candidates when I was interviewing them myself. You could line 100 software engineers up, and you've got hosts tech meetups at one side, life and soul of the party, and at the other end you've got somebody that adds just as much value, is just as good at what they do, but perhaps is the person that prefers to put the headphones on and keep themselves to themselves. And where do you kind of place yourself on that spectrum? And I think that most people will know where they are.
Yeah.
And I think embracing that is not a bad thing. And I think that even the most introvert might struggle more with a conversation about mundane topics. Down in the pub talking about whatever the interests are. However, the minute that you get them talking about what they do, they become a different person.
Yeah. And
therefore try and convey that ability to communicate on a technical level. Nobody needs to, there is no stereotype in terms of what the right and the only blueprint is. People can offer different values dependent on their own personalities.
Yeah.
And look, there will be, it's our problem as the consultant to understand what personality is going to fit with what client, you know, but then enable us to be able to give you that value as a candidate. And that's another of the benefits that we have in having the amount of opportunity that we have at the moment, because, you know, there's no point putting somebody into an organization, as great as it may seem, if they're just not going to be the right cultural fit. So, you know, from a candidate's perspective, try and come out of your shell when you're talking about things that you feel comfortable with and passionate about, but also from a candidate's perspective, using us to our greatest value. Allow us to add that value to your search by trusting us, by being transparent with us, by allowing us to understand how you work, who you are, what makes you tick, what gets the best out of you as an employee.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of the perception that, you know, if you're working with a recruiter, they just want to, you know, bang out as many CVs as possible, place you in as many jobs as possible. It seems like what you're suggesting here, and certainly that's something we do at Client Server, it's more like you're an agent on their behalf.
100%. The word that has always come through is consultant, and consultants consult. And I think that, you know, we've never, as an organization, whether it was 13 years ago when I walked through the door with less than a dozen people to where we are now with pushing 100, you know, we've always been about relationship building. We've been about consulting. We've been about understanding requirements. And I think that, you know, we've never been, like I said earlier in the chat, just a pure volume type organization. It's about adding value. You know, it's about understanding. It's about asking the right questions. It's about listening to what people are saying. And it amazes me still that there are so many organizations, and look, don't get me wrong, I've never worked anywhere else. I've never experienced it from the inside, but I have conversations with candidates and clients on a daily basis and know that there are still companies out there that are getting it wrong. And I'm not telling anybody how to do their job, because it's in our interest that they're not doing it as well as we are. But in the same way, where I think that we really do come to the fore is because we have the ability to do that. And we're a recruitment consultancy, you know, consultancy being the key word. And that means that regardless of whether you're candidate or client, you know, we have the ability to communicate. You know, for me, the biggest tool in recruitment is the ability to communicate. You know, you've got to have all the other stuff. You've got to be driven. You've got all that. But if you're going to be successful, you need to be able to talk, listen, and they're basic skills, but they're skills that some people still manage to get wrong on occasions. And I think that, you know, if you're a candidate, use our ability to be able to get the right information out of you to then to be able to help you as effectively as we can.
The thing about certainly anyone who has ever worked with any recruiter knows that there's a process, and certainly one of the biggest complaints you hear about online is that you submit an application through a recruiter, the recruiter contacts you, and then you get ghosted. You hear nothing about it. But that's not the case here, is it? It's very much a case of you have to find out about what this person is about first, and it's never sort of casting them out. So talk a little bit about our process and why we're different.
Well, I think that the fact that we obviously, you know, we advertise roles online through multiple different sources. We've got our database, we've got our own personal networks, but we never pigeonhole a candidate into a role. You know, they're never only considered for that vacancy. And I think that the approach that we take, being that initial conversation, is very much higher level. Who are you? What do you want to do? What don't you like about what you're currently doing? What do you want from your future roles? Then enables us to have a much wider consideration when it comes to opportunities that we might be dealing with, because it's so easy to put a candidate into a role, only consider them for that role, but almost then base everything that you ask that candidate about that specific role, and you just don't get real answers. You get answers that are specifically targeted because that is what they think you want to hear. So we're always going to be interested in building out that knowledge base to be able to then understand what we can best do to help.
I'm conscious of where we are in the time. We've got a few minutes left, and if you have any questions, please send them through to us. But if you were to share your top 3 pieces of advice for any candidate, the piece of advice 3 pieces of advice 9 times out of 10 are going to get someone a little bit further ahead, what would they be?
Don't spread yourself too thinly. So even in this kind of market, there are still candidates that think that having their details published across every conceivable job board is the way forward because they're going to get loads of interest back. That's not going to be the most effective, because you'll reach the point where your phone will be ringing off the hook. And as appealing as that may sound, it's probably not the best approach, because you're not going to be able to put value into all of those conversations. You need to trust somebody that you believe is going to represent you in the best possible way. And therefore, I think that having 4 or 5 things on the go is probably optimal. I think once you start going beyond that, you have too much to be able to do the due diligence that we've spoken about. Having less than that and picking a role or 2 to focus on and then going back to square one means that potentially you're giving yourself too much exposure. So that would be number 1. Number 2 is the whole due diligence bit. We've already touched on it. We touched on it from a client perspective, but I think equally, yes, you may be able to do your job and you may be able to deliver when you're put behind a keyboard, but interviewing is a technique, and good engineers often fall foul of an interview because they haven't prepared interview questions. And the analogy that I've used on many occasions is that, if you pick up the Telegraph crossword and you read it the first time, having never seen it before, you kind of can't get your head behind what they're actually after. But you do a few and all of a sudden you get onto the same wavelength. It's the same with interview questions. The theoretical stuff that you may not have touched since you were at university, or if you never did comp sci, maybe didn't even do at university. The knowledge of which doesn't necessarily make you a good or a bad engineer, but it will be the difference between whether you potentially progress beyond that initial stage or not. So preparation is number 2 from both a client and a technology perspective. And I guess number 3 is don't have too many people fighting your corner. Don't try and obviously I would always love to say that we deal with a candidate on an exclusive basis, but the reality is it's minimal in terms of the amount of times that does actually happen. That said, you don't want 4, 5, 6 different consultancies dealing with you, because there's then a very clear vested interest, and as much as we might say that we wouldn't, there will be consultancies that will then clearly try and for their own benefit close you against their clients, and you don't get that transparency of what is the best role. But equally, you've got people calling you left, right, and center for time in your diary, for availability, and the more people that are actually thrown into that mix, thrown into that process, the more of a nightmare it gets to manage from your perspective as well, because you forget who's representing you for what. They would be my top 3, I would imagine.
Fantastic. Well, it's a huge market out there. There's massive opportunity out there, and certainly we at Client Server are uniquely placed to be able to help anyone within the tech sector look at their career and look at the jobs that are out there. So visit our website, which is www.client-server.com, or follow us on our social media pages, particularly LinkedIn, where we often are promoting jobs and other pieces of content to help you along with your job search. And we'll be back with Talking Tech in the new year. So we'll be having one of these every month throughout 2022. It'll be the last Wednesday of every month. It'll be a mixture of pieces of advice for candidates and clients and everything in between. We will have the full gambit of what's going on in the world of technology. So from me, I'm Michael Oliver, Head of Marketing, and Adam Jukes. We'll catch you around. Thank you very much.